So here I'm going to talk you through, with the aid of some video, the conversion of a standard road bike to a street legal e-bike using the Dillenger kit. This here is my wife's bike, which I've already successfully converted, and what we'll be looking at will be the conversion of my own bike, which you can see here. This is the box as it arrives from Dillenger 48 hours after the order was placed, and here we go, have a look at the contents. So here is the replacement front wheel with the motor hub and the cable exit on the right hand side, and various small cardboard boxes which contain other components which we'll talk through in just a second. Very well packed, as you can see. So there it is, the wheel itself, 26-inch wheel in my case. Here's the charger, which comes with UK and continental cable. This is the battery as packed, and there it is out of the wrapping. In the middle of the picture there is the PAS unit, the pedal assistance, which detects your pedal cadence. This is the control unit, which goes on the middle of your handlebars. These are the two brake sensors, which in fact I won't be using. The cable wiring loom. This is a motor extension cable, which you only need if you're doing a rear wheel conversion, really. I won't be using it. Hand throttle, which again I won't be using as it's not a UK legal item. And assorted cable ties and cable protection sleeve. So here we are with the candidate for conversion, which is my Saracen bike, which is best part of 40 years old, but still in roadworthy condition, I'm happy to say. First part of the operation is going to be to remove the front wheel and replace it with the motor front wheel from the Dillenger kit. So we dispense with the existing front wheel. I'll just stop the video while I whip the wheel out. Here are the front forks, and there's a couple of tests you really need to do with these, just to make sure that everything's ready for conversion. First is to check the diameter of the width of the dropouts is at least 10mm, which I've done here using the shank of a 10mm drill. And the spacing between the forks should be nominally 100mm. Here I've got 99 and a bit, which is fine. The forks will give enough for it to be plus or minus a few millimeters either way. There we are, 99.03. Next thing to check is the width between the crank and the bottom bracket there, which should be a minimum of 5mm, so that you can install the pedal sensor. You see mine comes out to be 5.35, which is 5.36 I should say, which is adequate. And the next thing is on the left hand side of the wheel there is a spacer. For those of you with disc brakes, you take this off and replace it with the disc brake. I'm taking it off completely, A, because I don't have disc brakes, and B, because the Allen cap heads actually tend to foul the frame, the forks I should say. So I'm taking this off and discarding it. I'm not refitting the Allen cap heads because without the spacer they can actually foul the motor internals. Not good. So here we go, we deflate the tyre on my original wheel. I'm in my case going to refit this to the new motor wheel. You might want to buy a new tyre and inner tube to do that. It's up to you. And there we are. tyre and inner tube off, wheel set aside. There's the motor wheel. Put the cable exit uppermost. You can see there the opening for the valve, which is big enough to accommodate a Schrader valve. And there we've got the tyre partially on the rim, ready for the inner tube to be inserted. Inner tube in. This one's got a threading ring that you can lock the Schrader down with. Just there. And there we go. The tyre and inner tube installed satisfactorily onto the motor wheel. Underneath the protective cap there's an 18AF nut. So here we are with the front wheel fitted to my bike. I didn't think I'd bore you with the ins and outs. Fortunate enough that my dropouts, as I measured them, were 10mm, and therefore the axles from the motor unit dropped straight in. Now you'll see here I've elected to fit torque arms on both sides. I'll show the other side in a second. Both sides of mine as a protection for the dropouts. These I bought separately on eBay. They're 12 quid a pair, and much cheaper than buying them through the kit supplier. I'll show you my wife's bike. I fitted them on hers as well. I've had to do a slightly different installation on this bike. Reason being that there's a bit of a protrusion on my fork here, which if I put this arm here on the opposite side, it would foul and therefore wouldn't be able to fit it properly. So instead of that, I've put it on the outside. My wife's, that arm actually fits comfortably on the inside. The other thing to watch for is clearance. Clearance here, because you can see there's not a lot of clearance between the motor hub and the inside of the fork there, and so if I'd left the spacer there and the Allen cap heads, they would be fouling. On my wife's, they're clear. They were clear, but in my case, so at the moment I've got open holes there, but what I've done is I've ordered some grub screws to put in there just to blank those holes off. That's the protective cap that goes on the end here. There's one of those each side, but of course the one on the other side I'll have a look at in a second. Oh. Yeah, so these Jubilee clips here came as part of the supply with the torque arms, and they're way too long. I cut mine down with some tin snips. I've also protected the paintwork and what have you by putting a bit of car heater hose strapped on there. Put the clip around it. So moving to the other side, you see here cable exit coming out of the cutout in the end cap. Again, not tons of clearance there, so you've got to watch where you put the heads of these. In fact, I had to put only just a small piece of radiator hose on here. I couldn't put a bit on the back because it would have actually, Jubilee clip would then be fouling. Again, the arm on the outside here rather than the inside, and I put split a piece of rubber tube and slipped it over the cable, taped it up to give it a bit of added protection where it exits, as it does stick out a bit. And you see here I'm using these sort of Velcro type straps rather than cable ties. I bought a load of those really cheap. They're I bought some 150mm long, some 180 long, and they're ideal for strapping the cables up, and the advantage is you can easily remove them. So I wouldn't use cable ties in that situation unless something became a bit more permanent. And then the cable comes up the right arm of the fork, and there's a connector here. So this is the battery cradle installation. I step back a minute. It's gone straight on to the nutserts that are in the frame for drink bottle. I've got 2 sets of those, so it wouldn't go on the lower set without fouling the crank sprockets there, so it's gone on the upper set. And it's perfectly firm. They don't supply you with these screws. You hopefully will have something there that's holding your drink bottle on at the moment, or is blocking the holes off. That will be adequate. If not, they're fairly readily available. Astonishingly, I thought with my wife's bike, with the rack on the back, that I would need extra cable length. In fact, the opposite is true. You end up with an awful lot of spare cable on this style of installation. As you can see here, I've got it all bunched up under the crossbar at the moment. This here is the PAS, the cadence sensor, my installation. Now, this disc is supplied into as 2 pieces that you clip together and then put a metal clip round to retain it. The idea being to avoid you having to take the crank off, but in point of fact I found it necessary to take the crank off on both mine and my wife's bike, because you really need this to be pretty rigid, and therefore if there's any space, and there was a lot of space on my wife's bike, then you want to put some washers of some sort in to take up the space so that the thing stays nice and steady. I ended up putting a couple of thin plumbing washers, fibre washers, 16mm internal diameter, one either side, and then I put a bigger rubber washer, again out of a plumbing kit, just to take up the gap here. I chopped up a piece of fairly hard felt rubber. You could use like an eraser probably, and made a little block to go in here. You see 2 cutouts in the disc here, convenient for a cable tie, but if you pull the tie up too much, then instead of just anchoring the thing, it actually warps it, so you have to experiment a bit. So I made this packing by carving up a bit of fairly dense foam rubber. Behind there you can see the proximity sensor, and the gap there ideally needs to be less than 5mm. Well, I think it needs to be less than 5mm in order to work properly and pick up on the magnets as they go around. I'll go over my wife's bike shortly, but in the case of my wife's bike, I put this on this upright because the cabling was going to the rear wheel mounted rack. In this case I put it on here, which is more convenient because it goes direct to this unit. I've used cable ties here to attach it. I've bound some rubber tape, self-amalgamating tape, around the frame first to create a bit of a non-slip finish, and then I used 2 cable ties to actually attach the device, and then I've used another couple of cable ties and a bit of tubing or insulation offcuts to pretty much stop that from moving, and then I've split a piece of tube and put it around the cable here and taped it up. Bit of added protection against knocks and, you know, hitting it with your shoe or whatever. So that's the PAS unit. Also mounted now, the display and the little control that goes with it. I'll go through that in a bit more detail later on, but really needs to be convenient where you can reach it with your thumb but not foul your gear selectors or brakes. You see again here, I've got tons of spare cable bundled up from the cable loom, which was more than adequate to do a rear parcel rack installation. Here you've got oodles of cable left over. With the display you get an assortment of rubber spacers depending on what fit you have on your handlebar, 22mm or 25mm, but the whole thing attaches pretty fairly to that. And then there is a green cable which comes from the display unit, and it mates here with the cable from the loom. The little controller here is permanently wired to this unit, and then other cables in the loom are these two yellow ones here. In the instructions on Dillenger they actually tell you the wrong colour for those, but anyway that's the two for the brake sensors, and this is the one for the hand throttle that I'm not going to use because it's not UK legal. Now, one of the problems I've got with my bike as against my wife's is that these X-Arch brake and selectors are integral, and I want to replace the brake handles, but in doing so I'm going to have to also replace the selectors. I'll explain why in a minute or two. So here then is my wife's bike, slightly younger than mine, so a 26-inch, and because of the crossbar configuration here, insufficient room to put the battery cradle on the drink bottle insets, so bought a cheap 20 quid rack here and drilled that to take the cradle. Pretty simple job. You'll notice just as I scan over that cable wise there's more than adequate cable to complete this installation, and it's not all bunched up as it is on my bike. So from that perspective it's a cleaner install. Again, I put the torque arms on here, but I was able in this case to put the long arm on the back, which means it sits more centrally onto the forks, which are much sturdier on this bike than they are on mine. And again, not a lot of clearance between the motor hub. So on this side I've just put self-amalgamating tape underneath the clip, and the same here. But there is adequate clearance there. Again, I've taken the small bolts out that were holding the spacer, and I'm going to replace those with either shorter ones or grub screws, which I'm waiting for. They're on order. And here's the installation of the PAS unit on my wife's bike. So similar approach with the rubber block, tie wrap, but in this case there was quite a lot more space, so I've got some thicker plumbing washers. These sort of assorted plumbing washer kits have been very useful. So again, I took this crank off and I've put the PAS disc between two sort of nylon-y 2mm thick rubber, 2mm thick nylon washers. As I said, I've mounted the proximity sensor element on this tube because its cabling is going back to the battery tray. And again, I've done the same trick. I've attached the sensor itself with two tie wraps, and then I've tie wrapped a couple of bits of rubber tube. I've had to put a bit of car radiator hose, about 4 or 5 mil thick, to bring this forward enough to compensate for the fact that this tube is thinner than that one. But that will work very successfully. And here's the handlebar installation with the little control button, the display. Now, and you'll see here I've managed to find something to blank off the unused hand throttle connector, and these are the two connectors for the brake sensors. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about the brake cutout sensors that are supplied with the kit. This is what you get. You get these two proximity sensors with the cable and the yellow connectors. You get these two very powerful little, very small, like 1 centimeter each, magnets, which are very easy to lose, so don't go doing the installation on gravel and dropping one like I did at one point. And you also get this 3M foam tape for sticking these things on. Now I can show you, this is the installation I ended up doing on my wife's bike. So you've got the little magnet on the lever side, you've got the detector, proximity sensor on this side, and they're stuck on, here's the other one, stuck on with the 3M tape. So if you go down that route, you need to thoroughly degrease everything with meths, so that you've got a good adhesion. But the other problem is everything has to line up perfectly. I didn't have a lot of confidence in the tape, and I must admit it is pretty solid. But the trouble is, being pretty solid, once you've attached it, that's it, you've got one shot. You've only got sufficient tape to do it once. And what I found was that these are incredibly sensitive. That magnet has to be hard up against the sensor, otherwise it's detecting a brake on and your motor won't drive. What I ended up doing was cocking the lever slightly like that and tying it off with a Velcro strap, and then installing the magnet so that there was a very positive contact. And I also reinforced the installation of the magnet with several wraps of wonderful self-amalgamating, self-vulcanizing tape. Nevertheless, this one I had to have a second stab at, and I used some different double-sided tape, which seems to have worked. But on the first trip out, couldn't get the drive to go because it was detecting a brake on from this unit, even though, as you can see, it looks to be completely closed. So I wasn't happy with that, and that's why I'm not going to go ahead and fit these on my own bike. And what I did instead was I had a look online, and I found these, which they're actually Bafang, I think that's how you pronounce it, Bafang units. They've got the same connector, the same 3 pins, but they've got an integral switch. Much better solution. So I fitted a pair of those to my wife's bike. Let's go and have a look at that. So here we go. I fitted a pair of these. I discarded my wife's old brake levers, which we had on the picnic table there. Replaced them with these. They were completely compatible, and there's now a very positive, yes, the brake is on, no it isn't, when you activate the brake. And it cost me, I think this set cost me 16 quid. The set I bought for my own bike, different source, 18 quid. Yeah, much less hassle than the kit supplied sticky things. I mean, I did end up buying more 3M tape and all the rest of it, but I think this is a better solution. Not sure if it's actually a legal requirement, but I'd like to have the brake sensors myself. Now going over to my bike a minute, the other problem I have here is with this style of brake. The brake and the selector are integral, so you lose one, you lose the other, so I've actually ordered a new set of selectors. But also here you can see normally this has a fairing over here, which would tend to inhibit the whole thing. But also this is much lower than that. That surface is much lower than that, so getting the proximity sensors to mate up would be another enormous faff, and I decided against it. And what it's cost me is 18 quid for another pair of brakes, brake levers, and another 18 quid for a pair of selectors, which I hope I can replace my selectors with and everything work okay. If you are going to go online and procure a set of the Bafang units, just make sure that you get the right gender connectors. So they need to be the same gender as the kit supplied proximity sensor units. There are others on there which are 3-pin, but they're their opposite gender, so don't do that. That will give you a whole further problem. While I'm here, these are the stacks of diminishing stack, in this case, of Velcro ties that I've used for most attaching the cables. Far more convenient than cable ties, and if you need to adjust something, or if you get a puncture and you need to take the wheel off, you can undo these things and redo them again afterwards. You don't have to start carrying around cable ties with you as part of your repair kit. So here we are, we've got our M5 by 5mm grub screws that have the socket in the top is a 2.5mm Allen key, and I'm just going to put those into the openings in my front hub to seal them off, and when I do that I'm going to coat them with Loctite 243, Loctite blue thread lock to stop them coming adrift. So there we are, I've popped those in with the blue thread lock. They weren't a particularly close fit, so I just keep an eye on those in case they, if once the thread lock goes off, they should be secure enough, but if not, I'll have to think again. Okay, so this is my wife's bike again, and I'm now going to replace these screws that previously held on or were supplied for holding on a disc brake with a shorter button head M5x5 Allen screw with some blue Loctite, and there shouldn't be any risk then of it fouling anything. There's that much more clearance on my wife's bike, so rather than using grub screws I'm going to use these M5x5 button heads. Let's just go ahead and do that. So there we are, all 6 of those now replaced, and see there's clearance there. Don't have any problems with them fouling the forks, so I prefer these to the grub screws as they're with the head on them. They're more positive, but I still put the blue Loctite on anyway, and that's that job done. Right, so here we go, this is my bike in its finished state. Completely replaced the gear and gear selectors with some other alternative Shimano stuff, and see here we go, here's the display, remote control for it, and as I say, I use the same brakes as on my wife's bike, which were have the built-in brake sensors rather than the stick-on ones. And I ultimately decided to replace these with, take out the grub screws and replace them with these, the same as I put on my wife's bike, because there was just enough clearance, and I was a bit concerned the other ones, even with the thread lock, seemed a bit loose. So there we go, it's the job done. And yeah, we went out for a ride yesterday, took a bit of a video of that. I'll edit that and include that as well. Obviously a lot of cables here and there, may do a bit to tidy those up in the long run, but otherwise satisfactory conversion. I'll get the battery in a minute and put that on, light the display up, explain a bit about that. So the battery. Here's my battery here. It's the green tape is just my colour code to distinguish it from my wife's, so that we don't get, the only thing that's different about them is the locks and the lock codes, so it's just so we don't get those mixed up. I'll just show you how that goes on now. So just turn it on, slide it back, it locks into place, and then just take this off the stand. Yeah, so that's it in place. And then the key lock. So all the key does is lock it on to the battery holder. It doesn't do anything as regards switching it on or off. The little blue light above, that's the on-off switch, which we can just do now. So that's power on. Just pause this a second. Okay, here's the display. So push the button here, hold it, and here comes the display. Okay, you can see at the moment 0 speed, lots of battery. I've changed mine into miles an hour. Down here is our last trip, 9.9 miles, because I haven't reset it. And here's the assistance level. So by pressing the button there, you change that from 1 to 5. If you're really interested, you can go into the settings and alter that, or 0 to 5 I should say, so that it goes from 0 to 9. It's an alternative. Right, so I've got a distance travelled here. I want to get rid of that. So hold the plus and the minus down. Okay, and this is a no, N for no. Change that to yes, and that's data clear. And it cycles through 4 steps. The next one is backlight, which I'm not interested in. This is the one where you change between miles and kilometres, whether you want to read out in miles or kilometres. I've got mine set to miles. If you want to change it, oh sorry, the time does, it does time out if you do nothing. Here, step through again. That illumination, miles or kilometres, and that's the time off the display. And then back to normal, and you see now my trip has zeroed itself. We went out for a bit of a ride yesterday, which I shall try and edit. I did video it, but unfortunately the sun reflecting off the display meant that you wouldn't see a lot of it. What I do recommend is, if you go to the Dillenger website, you can download the full instructions for this, which are separate to the installation instructions, and that will tell you all these other settings that you can get into password protected settings, which change things like the bike wheel diameter. Somewhere there you can set your PAS increments from, instead of 0 to 5, 0 to 9, and various other settings which you wouldn't normally want to mess with, so they're password protected, and the password is a default which is supplied in the instructions. So there we go. To turn off, if you don't ride or do anything, this display goes off automatically after the time you've selected. Otherwise, you push and hold and off it goes. And that's that really. Okay, here we are. A bit I missed out before was here's the brake indicators. So either brake on, you get the brake symbol, and that automatically cuts the power regardless of what setting you're in. Either brake. There you go. One more point to make, I suppose, is the keys are all coded, so you get two keys. They all have an individual code number, if you like. Let's say all they do is lock the battery into the cradle, but you probably want to make a record of that number, which is embossed on the lock and also on the key itself, so that you do these both your keys, you've got some chance of getting a replacement out of Dillenger. And that's it for now. Okay, so I'm going to try for a bit of a summing up now, having finished the conversion on both the bikes. So to recap on a few things, some useful items, or items that I've found useful, which I think you might also find useful, one is a self-amalgamating or self-vulcanizing tape is another name for it. It's easy enough to find on the internet, or maybe at electrical suppliers. It's great stuff. It's very stretchy, rubbery. It's not adhesive in the way that electrical tape is. It bonds to itself a bit in the way that cling film does. It amalgamates to form rubber, and if you have to remove it, you have to cut it most of the time. You won't be able to peel it off, but it is great for protecting paintwork where you're clamping things on. It's good for providing a bit of a friction surface, and also if you want a permanent watertight connection on anything, if you wrap that around the seal, then it'll basically watertight the thing. In the same vein, I'd say silicone grease is useful on the connector plugs. A little bit of silicone grease, not on the pins, but on the mating surfaces of the plugs. A, it'll help to keep the waterproof connection, and B, it aids dismantling if you do have to disconnect anything at some later date. It lubricates the surfaces, makes them less inclined to permanently bond and stick. Already mentioned was the Velcro straps, otherwise known as hook and loop straps. Again, available on eBay. I used 150mm long and 180mm. I think they're 12mm wide, something like that. I also found a plumbing washer kit, handy as a source of random plastic and fibre washers and rubber washers that you can use to take up space on your crank around the PAS sensor. I had some car radiator hose lying around, but you could also use 4 to 5mm thick rubber if you need to stand off, for example, the PAS sensor. If you're not using the brake disc mounting, then you might want to get some M5x5 button head Allen screws, half a dozen, to close off the holes in the hub. I wouldn't recommend using the grub screws unless you really don't have enough clearance. If you do use the grub screws, then well, in both cases I would put thread lock on anyway. A few more robust tie wraps than the ones provided in the kit, I would say, are useful. Um, Going forward, I'd add an 18mm AF open-end spanner or adjustable spanner capable of going to 18mm AF to your bike toolkit for when you're out and about, because that's what you'll need to get the front wheel off. It's a bit of a larger nut size than would conventionally be on a front wheel, so you may find that spanners you've already got in your bike toolkit don't cover that. For assembly and maintenance going forward, a good set of Allen keys. In summary, I mean, I think the kit's fabulous. My wife's very pleased with it. I think it's worked out very well for me. I didn't like the brake proximity sensors. Depending on what your brake levers are like, you might be able to get them to work more successfully, but I deemed it worth the extra expenditure to get myself the alternative ones, the Bafang ones that I found online. If you're doing a rear mount, putting the battery case cradle on a parcel rack at the back, you will find the cable lengths are more than adequate. If you're doing the version I used for my bike, which was the water bottle Allen keys that are on Allen screws rather that are on the down tube, well, you'll end up with a lot of spare cable at the end. Definitely download the instructions for installation and the separate instructions for the display control unit. Beware that, as far as I found anyway, the instructions can be a bit misleading on colours of connectors, because, for example, they identified the colour of the I think it was the brake sensor connectors as being red or orange, and they're not, the yellow. But you can't mix them up with the manual throttle because they're different genders. The other thing I bought and added was a pair of, to each installation, was a pair of the torque arms to protect the dropouts. I mean, my bike and my wife's bike, both sort of regular road bikes, the dropouts aren't terribly reinforced, so for an extra, I think it was £12, I thought it was worth the investment to put these, to add these to the installation. I guess that's about it. I will append a clip, a 10-minute clip of my first ride out on my bike, which you can look at or not. It's entertaining, and it demonstrates, I think, that certainly we went out for a 10-mile ride with a bit of a headwind and lots of hills, living in the Cotswolds. I think the most I used or needed to use was 3 on the 0 to 5 setting. I did try out 4 just to see what it went like, and when we got back, the amount of battery usage was minimal, really. Hadn't used much at all. So I'd be interested to go out on a longer ride and see if I can push the battery capacity a bit, and there we go. Look forward to having more fun. Thanks. Bye. there's a big hill coming up, so here it is. Going up to 3. Down to 2. Keep those pedals turning. And up to 3. Trying not to swallow the flies. Freewheeling again. Wear a face mask, damn it. Last time time I did this unassisted. This is certainly a lot easier. Two. Let's get still a bit of a fuck about. Burst of force, shall we?